results and positive results for that matter for a country that has seen conflict for 10 months. This is because just after President Zuma had arrived, we spoke to Foreign Affairs Minister Alain Nyamitwe from Burundi here, and he was saying although the country is for talks and what they say all-inclusive talks, they still feel that parties that took part in the attempted coup or parties that have formed rebel groups should not join those talks. However, the African Union, the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council and the East African community believe everybody who has stakes in the peace and security in Burundi should be involved in those talks.
Sarah, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon has just been to Burundi as part of growing international efforts to bring about peace. What came out of his visit?
Well, during his visit, President Nkurunziza promised that he would be releasing 2,000 prisoners, most of them young people who have taken part in protests that started in April last year when President Nkurunziza announced that he would be going for a controversial third term. He also said that he would agree to hold talks with opposition groups. And this is where there is confusion, because when he said opposition groups, a lot of people thought that he would actually, bend backwards and accept to have rebel groups and those seen as dissidents now join the talks. However, it is clear now that those groups will not be joining. But he also said that he wanted to see the United Nations and the African Union take a bigger role in those talks.
Nkurunziza has, according to the UN Secretary General, agreed to those inclusive dialogues between government and his opponents. But as you say, it seems that some groups may not be welcome around the negotiating table. What does that say in terms of hope for these talks succeeding and peace being restored to Burundi?
Well, because the talks have just started now, the ones led by the African Union high-level panel, we wait to see if tomorrow the groups here, the African heads of state who are meeting here, will be able to push a little harder to have everybody included in those talks. Because today the leaders have met leaders from the political parties, they have met religious leaders, and they have also met leaders from civil society. So we wait to see if by the time they leave here tomorrow, they will have a solution on that very thorny issue.
Tell us more about this 5-member panel. Also, President Jacob Zuma, what's his relationship like with President Pierre Nkurunziza?
Well, maybe we begin by talking about President Zuma and South Africa in general. When it comes to Burundi, South Africa started leading the talks in 2000 when it became clear that there needed to be mediation. Those talks started with President Mandela, the late President Mandela, and then President Zuma took over those talks and he mediated talks between the warring factions during the civil war until a peaceful solution was found in 2000, and that is what we call the Arusha Accord. Now, the leaders who have been picked, the 5 leaders we are talking about now, are from the 5 regional economic commissions: West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, and also representatives from the African Union and Ethiopia. And so these leaders will now try to see that Burundi comes together. This is an initiative led by the African Union.
Sarah, remind us about the situation on the ground. What's it like in Burundi? Because we get descriptions that the situation is dire, the violence is out of control.
Well, the situation, what happens is during the day, everything seems normal. But like today, when there were several heads of state in the country, you can see heavy military presence on the streets. You can see heavy police presence on the streets. However, at night is when you hear the gunshots. It's when you hear the grenades, and especially when the international visitors in the country. Last night, we indeed had some of those gunshots and gunfire. On the streets, most of the people will not agree to speak to the media because they fear. They say of reprisals. Just today, the Human Rights Watch released a report accusing the government of abducting and killing young people who have taken part in protests and people who have participated in condemning a third term for President Nkurunziza. However, Foreign Affairs Minister Nyamitwe denies.
Gauging from the responses of those who have actually spoken to you on the ground, what seems to be the answer to this Burundian crisis here, Sarah? Is it strong pressure? Is it real sanctions?
Well, I think strong pressure will work because if you look at what happens is every time international leaders come, the Burundian leaders are very eager to meet them. They are very eager to give a side of the story. However, positions that they have refused to budge. Take, for example, the issue of including the rebel groups, the issue of accepting international presence in the country, be it mediators, be it a human rights group that can be able to monitor human rights monitors to see that indeed there is no abuse of human rights. So the group that is here, the 5 presidents that are here, will really not get much if they don't push harder, because the UN Security Council has been here before. There has been a human rights monitors from the African Union, and the UN Secretary General was also here. So it means that there might be more pressure put on these leaders. Sanctions, there is a problem with sanctions because it seems that all the groups are not united. The European Union has already slapped sanctions. The other African Union is taking its time, and the East African community, which is closer home to Burundi, has also taken its time, and it's not clear if they will indeed go the sanction way. Just this coming week, there will be a summit on an East African Community summit, which will also discuss Burundi.
Reporter Sarah Kimani coming to us from Bujumbura, where 5 African heads of state are in the country to push for peace talks. And she was giving us an updated version of what's been happening there so far.